The woman fell on the church steps like God had cut her strings. Silas Crane saw it from the doorway, saw her knees buckle, saw her arms clutch something to her chest, saw her body hit the whitewashed wood with a sound that made the congregation gasp. February cold poured through the open door. Folks pushed past him, voices rising, someone calling for the pastor. But Silas didn't move. He was staring at this bundle in her arms, at the wool wrapped around it, blue, hand-stitched, dotted with white thread stars that his wife Eleanor had sewn 30 years ago for a baby boy who'd grown into a man who'd walked out and never come back. That blanket, his blanket, Thomas's blanket. The church bell should have been ringing. It wasn't. The woman's eyes fluttered shut. The baby inside the wool began to cry. And Silas Crane felt the earth tilt beneath him like the Lord himself had asked a question he couldn't answer. He hadn't touched that blanket since the night his son rode away. Now it was the only thing standing between a stranger's baby and the frozen air pouring off the Wind River range. Pastor Whitmore reached the woman first. He knelt beside her, pressed 2 fingers to her throat, and looked up with relief that didn't quite mask the worry beneath it. She's alive. Pulse is weak, but she's alive. Get her inside, someone said. She'll freeze out here. Who is she? Never seen her before. That baby. Is it breathing? Voices tangled over each other like tumbleweeds in a gust. The congregation crowded the steps, breath rising in white clouds, faces pinched against the cold. Silas stood at the edge of them, still as a fence post, watching the wool rise and fall with the infant's tiny breaths. Blue wool, white stars. Some of them unraveled now, threads loose and fraying, but still there, still hers. Eleanor had spent 3 months on that blanket, stitching by lamplight while her belly grew round with Thomas. She'd put 47 stars in the pattern, one for every state in the Union, plus the territories she hoped would join before the boy grew old. Thomas had taken it when he left, stuffed it in his saddlebag like it meant nothing, like she meant nothing. Silas's hands clenched at his sides. Jed Harrow pushed through the crowd, hat pulled low against the wind. He stopped beside Silas, followed his gaze to the blanket, and went still. Silas. No answer. Silas. I know what it is. How in the hell did some stranger get Eleanor's? I don't know. The words came out scraped and raw. I don't know. Pastor Whitmore was giving orders now. 2 men lifted the woman, carefully, her limbs loose as a rag doll's, while Mrs. Harmon from the general store reached for the baby. No. Silas's voice cut through the noise. Everyone turned. I'll take them. The pastor blinked. Silas, she needs warmth. A doctor. Doc Miller can meet us at the ranch. It's closer than town, and I've got room. He was already moving, boots loud on the wooden steps, coat open to the cold he didn't feel. Jed, bring the wagon around. Jed hesitated only a second, then nodded and broke for the hitching post. Silas reached the woman. Up close, she looked worse, cheekbones sharp as blades, lips cracked and bloodless, dark circles carved beneath her eyes. Her dress was thin, patched at the elbows, soaked through at the hem where snow had melted against it. She'd been walking in this, with a baby. He knelt, lifted her. She weighed nothing. Less than a yearling calf, less than a sack of feed. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and a small sound escaped her throat. Not words, just breath, just survival. The baby was still pressed to her chest, held tight even in unconsciousness. Silas could see its face now, red and scrunched, mouth open in a thin wail that sounded like a kitten mewling. A boy, he thought. Something about the set of the jaw, the shape of the brow. He didn't let himself think about why that shape looked familiar. The wagon rattled up. Jed jumped down, spread a horse blanket across the bed, and helped Silas lay the woman down. The baby stayed in her arms. Her fingers wouldn't unclench from the wool, even when Mrs. Harmon tried to take him. She won't let go, Mrs. Harmon said. Then let her hold him. Silas climbed into the wagon bed, settled against the sideboard, and pulled his own coat off. He draped it over the woman and child, tucking it around them like he was wrapping something fragile against a storm that hadn't finished yet. Jed swung up to the driver's seat, took the reins. Silas, you want to tell me what's happening? No. That blanket. I said no, Jed. The wagon lurched forward. Behind them, the congregation stood in a silent cluster on the church steps, watching the richest man in Fremont County ride away with a half-dead stranger and a baby wrapped in a dead woman's handiwork. The church bell still didn't ring. Doc Miller was waiting when they reached the ranch. Someone from town must have ridden ahead, because the old physician was already climbing the porch steps with his bag in hand, breath fogging in the afternoon light. They carried the woman inside, the guest room, not Thomas's room, never Thomas's room, and later on the bed that hadn't been slept in since Eleanor's sister visited 8 years ago. Mrs. Pruitt, Silas's housekeeper, appeared with hot water and clean linens. Doc Miller bent over the woman, checking her pulse, her breathing, the color of her fingernails. Exhaustion, he said finally. Exposure, malnutrition. She hasn't eaten properly in weeks, maybe longer. The baby's underfed too, but he's stronger than she is. He straightened, wiped his hands on a cloth. Another night out there, Silas. Another night and you'd be digging 2 graves. Silas stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face carved from the same stone as the fireplace. She'll live. If she rests, if she eats, if that baby gets proper milk, goat's milk will do. Doc Miller studied him. You know this woman? No. Then why? I don't know her. Silas's jaw tightened. But I know that blanket she's holding. My wife made it. My son took it when he left. Doc Miller's expression shifted. Everyone in the county knew about Thomas Crane, knew he'd run off, knew Silas had buried an empty coffin 2 winters back when word came from Denver, knew no one mentioned the boy's name in this house unless they wanted to see. Silas Crane's face turned to granite. Silas, the doctor said slowly. There were papers in her coat, letters. I didn't read them, but he reached into his vest, pulled out a folded bundle tied with string. One of them had a name on the outside. Thomas Crane. The room went quiet. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Silas stared at the letters. At his son's name in handwriting he didn't recognize. She knew him, Doc Miller said. Whoever she is, she knew your boy. Silas didn't take the letters, didn't move, didn't blink. The woman on the bed stirred, murmured something too faint to catch, and pulled the baby closer. The star blanket shifted, and for a moment Silas saw the infant's face clearly, eyes still closed, but something in the line of the nose, the set of the tiny chin, Thomas's chin, Thomas's nose. His heart seized. Get out, he said. Silas, all of you, out, now. They went, Doc Miller, Mrs. Pruitt, even Jed, who lingered in the doorway with a question on his face that Silas couldn't answer. The door closed. The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire and the soft, steady breathing of the woman and child. Silas stood alone, staring at the bundle of letters on the nightstand, at the blanket his wife had made, at the baby who might be, who couldn't be. He didn't move, didn't reach for the letters, didn't touch the blanket. He just stood there, a man who'd built an empire out of cattle and silence, and felt the ground shift beneath him, like the whole world was asking a question he'd spent 7 years refusing to hear. Who saves whom? The fire popped, the baby sighed in his sleep, and Silas Crane realized that the woman he'd pulled from death's door might be carrying the only thing that could save him or destroy him completely. She woke in a dead woman's bed, in a house that smelled like cedar and regret. Miriam's eyes opened to unfamiliar shadows, a ceiling too high, walls too solid, curtains too fine. Panic seized her chest before sense caught up. The baby. Where's the baby? She turned her head. There. A makeshift cradle beside the bed, an apple crate lined with quilts, and inside it, her son, sleeping, breathing, alive. The air left her lungs in a rush. She lay still for a long moment, letting her heart beat slow, letting her eyes adjust to the dim winter light filtering through frost-etched windows. The room was clean, carefully kept, but it had the feel of a place long unused. Dried lavender sat in a bowl on the dresser. Lace curtains hung perfectly still. A rocking chair in the corner held a folded quilt that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Where am I? The last thing she remembered was cold. The church steps. The white paint bright against the gray sky. Her knees giving out. Her arms locked around the baby because if she let go, if she ever let go... A door opened. Miriam tensed, but the woman who entered wasn't threatening. Plump, gray-haired, an apron tied over a sensible dress, carrying a tray with steam rising from a bowl. Her face was kind, in the worn, smooth way of women who'd spent their lives tending to others. You're awake. The woman set the tray on the nightstand, relief softening her voice. Thank the Lord. We weren't sure you'd make it through the night. Miriam tried to speak. Her throat felt lined with sand. Where? Broken Arrow Ranch, Mr. Crane's place. The woman, housekeeper, Miriam guessed, poured water from a pitcher into a cup and held it to her lips. Small sips now, you've been out 2 days. 2 days. Miriam drank, the water cutting through the dryness, and tried to piece together what she knew. The church. The fall. Arms lifting her. A wagon. Voices she couldn't place. Mr. Crane, she repeated. The name landed in her chest like a stone. That's right. He's the one who brought you in. Carried you himself, right off those church steps. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pruitt, she said her name was, adjusted the pillows behind Miriam's head with practiced efficiency. You're lucky he was there. Another hour in that cold and you'd have been past saving. Crane. Thomas's father. The man Thomas had called a tyrant, a miser, a heart made of Wyoming granite. The man who'd told his only son he wasn't blood anymore and watched him ride away without a word. Miriam had spent 2 years hating Silas Crane. She'd built him into a monster in her mind. The reason Thomas never went home, The reason he died in a Denver boarding house instead of in a warm bed surrounded by family. She'd walked 400 miles to collapse on church steps because she wanted her son to die somewhere holy, somewhere with hymns and prayers and people who might bury him proper. She hadn't planned to survive. She certainly hadn't planned to wake up in his house. The baby, she managed. Is he healthy as can be, considering? Mrs. Pruitt's face softened as she glanced at the cradle. Underfed, but strong. We've been giving him goat's milk. He's taken to it well. Miriam closed her eyes. Strong. He's strong, just like Thomas had been, before the fever hollowed him out. There's broth here when you're ready, Mrs. Pruitt continued, gesturing to the tray. And bread. Nothing heavy yet. Your stomach won't handle it. But you need to eat, Mrs. She paused. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Cole. The word came out hoarse. Miriam Cole. Mrs. Cole. The housekeeper nodded. Well, Mrs. Cole, you're safe here. Whatever trouble brought you to those steps, it can't reach you inside these walls. Miriam wanted to laugh. The trouble wasn't outside. The trouble was in her coat pocket. 3 letters Thomas had written to his father and never sent. 3 letters that would either heal Silas Crane or break him entirely. She didn't know which one she wanted. The days blurred together at first, sleep and soup, weak light through frosted glass, the baby's cries cutting through dreams she couldn't hold on to. Mrs. Pruitt came and went with food, with clean linens, with gentle words that expected no answers. A ranch hand named Jed stopped by once, hat in hand, awkward as a schoolboy at a dance. Ma'am, he'd said, not quite meeting her eyes. Glad you're upright. She'd thanked him. He'd fled like she'd pointed a rifle at his chest. The baby fussed less now. Mrs. Pruitt had found an old wooden rattle somewhere. Thomas's, maybe? From 30 years ago, and the boy gripped it with tiny fingers that were finally losing their frightening bluish tinge. He was filling out, getting color in his cheeks, starting to look less like a creature who'd barely survived, and more like someone who might actually live. Miriam watched him sleep and felt something loosen in her chest. Not hope, exactly. She'd given up on hope somewhere around the Colorado border, but something close to it. Something that hurt less than despair. On the 4th morning, she made it to the kitchen. Mrs. Pruitt found her standing at the window, one hand braced against the frame, the other holding this baby against her shoulder. Outside, snow stretched across the valley like a white sea, broken only by fence posts and the dark shapes of cattle huddled near a barn that could have held a church inside it. You shouldn't be up, Mrs. Pruitt said, though her voice held more approval than scold. I couldn't lie there anymore. Miriam shifted her weight, hiding how much the short walk had cost her. The walls were starting to talk. Mrs. Pruitt snorted, a sound that surprised them both, and set a kettle on the stove. Sit then. If you're going to be stubborn, at least be stubborn in a chair. Miriam sat. The kitchen was warm, fragrant with coffee and wood smoke and something baking in the oven. The baby squirmed against her chest, making small sounds that might have been contentment. She found herself almost smiling. He's a good boy, Mrs. Pruitt said, nodding toward the bundle in Miriam's arms. Hardly fusses. Not like... She stopped. Not like who? The housekeeper's hand stilled on the kettle. Not like Thomas, she said quietly. Thomas cried for the first 6 months of his life. Near drove his mother to distraction. A pause. But she never complained, not once. Miriam looked down at her son, Thomas's son. She sounds kind. She was. Mrs. Pruitt poured coffee into a tin cup and set it before Miriam. Kindest woman I ever knew. Mr. Crane, she hesitated, choosing words like a woman stepping across a frozen creek. He's not much for words, never has been. Harder on himself than anyone else. But he was different when she was alive. Softer. Thomas said he was cruel. The words hung in the air. Mrs. Pruitt didn't flinch. Thomas said a lot of things when he was angry. Doesn't mean all of it was true. She heard Silas before she saw him. Boots on the porch, the scrape of a chair, Mrs. Pruitt murmuring something Miriam couldn't catch, then footsteps, heavy, deliberate, approaching the kitchen. She straightened in her seat, pulse quickening, and pulled the baby closer without thinking. He filled the doorway, taller than she'd imagined. Weathered face, deep lines carved by sun and wind and something heavier than either. Gray at his temples, but his frame was solid, unbowed. His eyes swept the room, the stove, the window, her, and stopped. You're up. I am. Silence. Neither moved. His gaze dropped to the baby, stayed there. Something flickered across his face. Too fast to name, too raw to hide. The boy, he said. He yours? He's Thomas's. The name landed like a hammer on glass. Silas's hand moved to his side. No, to his left hand, to the gold band on his ring finger. His thumb rubbed across it once, twice. Thomas is dead. I know. Miriam's voice didn't waver. I buried him. More silence. The fire crackled. The baby made a soft, mewling sound and turned his face toward Miriam's warmth. Why are you here? The question came out rough, scraped clean of courtesy. I came to find holy ground. She met his eyes, gray, like Thomas's, like the baby's. I didn't come to find you. Then why? Because I was dying, Mr. Crane. And I wanted my son to die somewhere with a church, not on the side of a road, not like an animal. He stared at her. She braced for anger, for accusation, for the monster Thomas had described in bitter, broken words. What she got was silence. Then, slowly, he crossed to the cradle where the baby had slept each night, looked down at the small face, the tiny fists, the gray eyes that blinked open as if sensing his presence, and Silas Crane, cattle baron, millionaire, the hard man who'd let his only son ride away, reached down and adjusted the star blanket so it covered the baby's shoulders better. His name. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. What? The boy. Does he have a name? Miriam's throat tightened. No, Thomas died before we could decide. Silas nodded once. His hand lingered on the wool, the blanket he hadn't touched in 7 years. You'll stay here until you're strong enough to leave, both of you. He walked out before she could respond. The kitchen door swung shut behind him. Mrs. Pruitt stood frozen at the stove, cloth in hand, eyes wide. Miriam stared at the empty doorway, heart pounding, everything she thought she knew tilting sideways. Thomas had called his father a monster, but monsters didn't tuck blankets around babies they'd never met. Monsters didn't touch their wedding rings like rosary beads when they heard their dead son's name. She looked at the cradle, at the star blanket smoothed gently over her child, and realized she'd been carrying the wrong story for a very long time. She found the letters in Silas's desk, 12 of them, addressed to Thomas, never sent. The ink was faded. The pain was fresh. It happened on the 6th day. Silas had ridden out to check on cattle in the north pasture. Jed alongside him. Mrs. Pruitt was in the root cellar counting potatoes. The baby slept. And Miriam, restless in a way that had nothing to do with her healing body, wandered the house she'd been confined to, like a bird testing the bars of its cage. The study drew her. She told herself she was looking for something to read. A Bible, maybe. A newspaper. Anything to fill the hours between feeding the baby and staring at walls that held secrets she couldn't name. The room smelled of leather and tobacco and time. 2 armchairs faced a stone fireplace black with decades of soot. Bookshelves lined one wall, mostly ledgers, ranch records, a few worn volumes of poetry that surprised her, and in the corner, a desk built from a single oak, massive and scarred, the kind of furniture that outlasted the men who used it. The drawer was open, just a crack, just enough. She shouldn't have looked. She knew that even as her fingers closed around the bundle of envelopes tied with brown string, knew it as she read the address on the top one. Thomas Crane, General Delivery, Denver, Colorado. 12 letters, all in the same handwriting, blocky, careful, the penmanship of a man more comfortable with a branding iron than a pen, none of them mailed. Miriam sat down in Silas's chair, still warm from the fire he must have built that morning, and opened the first one. Son, I don't know how to start this. Your mother would have known. She always knew the right words. I only know cattle and silence, and neither of those will bring you home. I should have followed you. I should have said I was wrong. I should have said a lot of things. I won't mail this. You'd probably burn it anyway. But I'm writing it because the preacher says God hears even the words we don't speak. I hope that's true. I hope you're eating. I hope you're warm. Your father. Miriam's hands trembled. She read the second letter, the third. Each one the same. Clumsy, halting, a man trying to build a bridge with tools he'd never learned to use. Some were angry, some were pleading. One dated just 3 months before Thomas died was only 4 lines. I dreamed about you last night. You were a boy again, riding that spotted mare you loved. You were laughing. I haven't heard you laugh in 7 years. I'd give this whole ranch to hear it one more time. Pa, she put the letters down. Her chest ached like something had cracked open inside it. Thomas had told her his father never cared, never tried, would never bend. She'd believed him because she loved him, because his pain was real, because it was easier to hate a man she'd never met than to imagine that the truth might be more complicated than either of them could stand. 12 letters, 12 attempts, 12 failures of courage. He had tried. He just hadn't known how. That evening, Miriam found Silas in the kitchen. He sat alone at the long table, plate pushed aside, coffee cup cradled in hands that looked too rough for the delicate china. The fire had burned low. Shadows pooled in the corners of the room. She stood in the doorway until he looked up. Mrs. Cole? Mr. Crane? Neither moved to close the distance. Miriam pulled out a chair across from him and sat. The table stretched between them like a river neither knew how to cross. "Thomas talked about you," she said. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "I expect he did. He said you told him he wasn't your blood anymore, the night he left." "I did say that." "He believed you." Silas set down the cup, looked at her. His face was stone, but his eyes were something else. Something she hadn't expected. "Did he? He believed you until the day he died." Silence. The fire popped. Somewhere outside, a horse nickered in the barn. Silas's thumb found his wedding ring, rubbed it slow, deliberate, like a man telling beads on a rosary. "What else did he tell you?" Miriam held his gaze. "That his mother was kind, that she died too young, that you never smiled after." That's true enough." "He told me the ranch would be yours forever, that you'd rather die than let go of a single acre." "Also true." "He told me you never loved him." Silas's hand stopped on the ring. His face didn't change. Same weathered stone, same hard lines, but something behind his eyes shifted, cracked, like ice giving way over a spring that had never quite frozen. "That part," he said quietly, "was the only lie." The words hung between them. Miriam felt them settle into her chest, rearranging things she'd thought were fixed. She should tell him about the letters in her coat pocket, the ones Thomas had written and never sent, the mirror image of the bundle in his desk. 24 letters, 2 men, the same silence stretching across the same distance, but her throat closed around the words. She wasn't ready. Neither was he. "I should check on the baby," she said, and fled before he could see her eyes filling. The days that followed were strange, fragile, like walking on a frozen pond and listening for cracks. Silas didn't avoid her anymore, but he didn't seek her out either. They existed in the same spaces, kitchen parlor, porch, orbiting each other like planets that hadn't learned their paths yet. He asked about the baby's feeding. She asked about the weather. Mrs. Pruitt watched them both with the knowing eyes of a woman who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. Small moments accumulated like snow. Silas teaching her to check the wood stove's damper when the smoke backed up. His hands patient, his voice low, not a trace of the impatience Thomas had described. Jed bringing her a pair of Eleanor's old boots. No use to anyone in the attic. A ma'am. And Silas nodding approval when he saw her wearing them. The baby laughing for the first time. A wet gurgle that made Mrs. Pruitt clap her hands and made Silas stop in the doorway. Something raw and wondering crossing his face before he turned away. He still hadn't held the boy. But Mrs. Pruitt told her, quietly, that he visited the nursery every night after Miriam fell asleep. Just stood over the cradle, watching, staying until the fire burned low. One night, the baby wouldn't settle. Miriam walked him through the dark house, bouncing gently, murmuring nonsense words that meant nothing and everything. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet. Wind pressed against the windows like something trying to get in. She started to sing without thinking. An old hymn, one her mother used to sing, one Thomas had loved. "Abide with me, fast falls the eventide." Her voice was thin, cracked from disuse, but the baby quieted. His fussing softened to snuffles, then silence, then the deep, slow breathing of sleep. "The darkness deepens. Lord, with me abide." She didn't hear the footsteps in the hall. Didn't know Silas was there until she turned and saw his shadow through the cracked door, frozen, one hand raised as if to knock, the other pressed flat against the wall like he needed it to stay upright. Their eyes met. His face was stripped bare, no stone, no granite, just a man hearing his dead wife's favorite hymn sung to his grandson by a woman he barely knew. He didn't speak, didn't enter, just stood there until she finished, then walked away in silence. Miriam held the sleeping baby and listened to his boots fade down the hall, and understood that she'd just touched something that went deeper than letters or blankets or 7 years of silence. The visitor came 2 days later. Miriam heard the horse first, then voices on the porch, Silas's low rumble and another man's smoother tone, slick as oiled leather. She watched from the parlor window as a figure in a city coat dismounted and shook Silas's hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Who is that?" she asked Mrs. Pruitt. The housekeeper's mouth thinned. "Oswin Bell, lawyer from Cheyenne, land speculator." She said the last word like it tasted of vinegar. "He's been circling Mr. Crane for years, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Mrs. Pruitt didn't answer. But later, when Bell had gone, and Silas had retreated to his study with a bottle he rarely touched, Miriam overheard one of the ranch hands talking to Jed by the barn. "No heir means auction. Just a matter of time." She stood in the cold, those words settling into her bones. If Silas died without a legal heir, the ranch, everything he'd built, everything Thomas had walked away from, would go to the highest bidder. And the baby sleeping upstairs, Thomas's son, Silas's grandson, had no papers, no proof, nothing but a star blanket and a mother who'd nearly died on church steps. She wasn't just a guest here. She might be the key to everything. And somewhere in this house, the truth about Thomas, the whole truth, wrapped in letters neither father nor son had ever sent, was waiting to either save them all or burn everything down. Silas found the letters in her coat, and the handwriting was his son's. He hadn't meant to search, hadn't meant to be in her room at all. But the baby had been crying, and Mrs. Pruitt was in town, and Miriam had gone with Jed to see the horses because the woman needed air and Silas needed distance. So he'd climbed the stairs to check on the boy, telling himself it was duty, not something softer. The baby quieted the moment Silas appeared in the doorway. Gray eyes blinked up at him, Thomas's eyes. Eleanor's patience, and the tiny mouth worked around a sound that might have been contentment. Silas stood over the cradle for a long moment. His hands stayed at his sides. He hadn't held the boy yet. Wasn't sure he'd earned the right. Then something caught his eye. Miriam's coat, draped it over the chair by the window. A corner of paper, white against the dark wool, peeking from the inside pocket. He shouldn't have touched it. He knew that even as he crossed the room, even as his fingers closed around the folded sheets. But the paper was old, creased soft with handling, and the handwriting on the outside. His chest seized. Silas Crane, Broken Arrow Ranch, Lander, Wyoming. Thomas's handwriting. Thomas's careful letters, the ones he'd learned from Eleanor, the ones Silas had watched him practice at the kitchen table when he was 8 years old. 3 envelopes. 3 letters, never sent. His son had written to him. His dead son had written to him. And this woman, this stranger who'd collapsed on church steps with a baby and a blanket and nothing else, had been carrying them the whole time. He read them standing by the window, winter light falling across pages that shook in his hands. The first was anger, pure, clean, familiar. You told me I wasn't your blood. Fine. I don't need your blood. I don't need your land. I don't need anything you have. I hope you rot alone in that house with your money and your pride. Silas closed his eyes. He remembered the night he'd said those words, remembered the look on Thomas's face, hurt first, then hard, then gone. He'd told himself the boy would come back, would cool down, would see reason, would ride up the drive in a week or a month or a year, 7 years. And Thomas never came. The second letter was different, softer, confused. I met a woman. Her name's Miriam. She's kinder than anyone I've ever known. She asked about my family, and I lied. Said they were dead. Maybe they are. Maybe you were dead to me the moment you let me walk out that door. But sometimes I dream about the ranch, about the way the light hits the mountains in October, about Ma's voice singing in the kitchen. I don't know why I'm writing this. I won't send it. I never send them. Silas's throat tightened. He turned to the third letter, and the world fell away. I'm sick. The fever came last week, and it won't leave. Miriam's doing everything, but I can see it in her eyes. She knows. I know. I've been writing you letters for 7 years and never sent one. I don't know why I keep trying. Maybe because Ma used to say you loved different than most people. Quiet. Like the land loves the snow. Cold on top, but underneath, everything's still alive. I think I understand now. I think I was too young and too angry to see it. I'm sorry I never came home. I'm sorry I wasn't the son you needed. Tell Miriam it wasn't her fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. Just the way things go. If you ever read this, name him after her father, Samuel. She'd like that. Your son, Thomas. The letter fell from Silas's hands. He didn't feel his knees hit the floor, didn't feel the cold boards beneath him, didn't feel anything except the words burning through his chest like a brand pressed too long against flesh. I think I was too young and too angry to see it. I'm sorry I never came home. Your son, Thomas. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of unsent letters, of staring at an empty grave and wondering if his boy had died hating him. And the answer had been in this woman's pocket the whole time. Thomas hadn't hated him. Thomas had understood. At the end, when it mattered most, Thomas had finally seen what Silas had never known how to say. And Silas hadn't been there, hadn't held his hand, hadn't told him the truth, that he'd written letters too, that he'd tried, that he'd loved him every single day, even when love looked like silence. He heard the front door open, voices downstairs, Miriam's light step on the stairs. He didn't move. She found him kneeling by the window, Thomas's letters scattered on the floor, his face wet with tears he hadn't felt fall. Mr. Crane. She stopped, saw the papers, understood. You had these. His voice came out broken, strange. The whole time. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Miriam stood in the doorway, hands clasped in front of her like a woman bracing for a blow. Because I didn't know if you deserved them. A silence. And now? She looked at him, this man on his knees, this cattle baron with an empire and no one to leave it to, weeping over letters from a son who'd died for giving him. Now I don't know anything. Silas picked up the third letter. Read the last lines again. I'm sorry I never came home. Your son, Thomas, he didn't hate me. No. He was sorry. He wanted to come back. Yes. And I never... His voice cracked. I wrote him letters too. 12 of them. Never sent a single one. Miriam's breath caught. She crossed to the chair where her coat hung, reached into the other pocket, and pulled out a bundle tied with brown string. The letters she'd taken from his desk. The letters she'd read in secret, crying over a stranger's grief. She set them on the floor beside Thomas's. I know, she said. I found them. I'm sorry. I had to understand. 24 letters. Two men who'd loved each other across 7 years of silence, reaching through the dark, never quite touching. Silas stared at the twin bundles, at his handwriting and Thomas's side by side, father and son, mirror images of the same wound. He wrote 12, Miriam said quietly. You wrote 12. Neither of you mailed a single one. Silas's hand went to his wedding ring, stopped. For the first time, the old gesture didn't help. What do we do now? He asked. Miriam knelt beside him, not touching, just close enough to share the weight. I don't know, she said. But maybe we stop carrying this alone. The baby stirred in his cradle, made a soft sound. Gray eyes blinked open, finding them both, and for a moment the room held nothing but breath and grief and something that might, if they let it, become Grace. She was gone before sunrise. The baby, the blanket, and every letter she'd carried across 400 miles. Silas knew before he opened the door, knew the way a man knows a storm is coming, by the smell of the air, the pressure behind his eyes. The house felt different, emptier, somehow, though nothing visible had changed. The fire still crackled in the parlor, Mrs. Pruitt's coffee still warmed on the stove, but the silence had a different quality now, a hollowness that pressed against his ears like water. He climbed the stairs, 2 at a time. The guest room door stood open. The bed was made, corners tucked tight, pillows smoothed down flat, the way a woman might leave a room she never expected to return to. The cradle sat empty by the window, quilts folded neatly inside. No baby, no blanket, no coat on the chair. On the pillow, a single sheet of paper. Silas crossed the room. His hands were steady when he picked it up. His hands were liars. Mr. Crane, I shouldn't have come here. I thought I was doing the right thing, but all I've done is open wounds that should have stayed closed. Thomas blamed you his whole life. I helped him believe that. I told him he was right to leave. I told him you didn't deserve forgiveness. Maybe if I'd told him to go home, he would have. Maybe he'd still be alive. That's why I didn't give you the letters. Not because you didn't deserve them, because I was afraid they'd prove I was wrong, and that I killed your son with my silence. I'm sorry for what I took from you, both times. Miriam, he read it twice. 3 times. The words didn't change. I killed your son with my silence. She blamed herself. This woman who'd walked 400 miles through winter, who'd collapsed on church steps with nothing but a baby and a prayer, who'd carried Thomas's letters against her heart for 2 years. She thought she was the reason his boy never came home. The paper crumpled in his fist. Jed! His voice tore through the house. Jed! Boots on the stairs. The foreman appeared in the doorway, face creased with sleep, alarm sharpening his eyes. What is it? She's gone. The woman, the baby. They're gone. Jed's gaze swept the empty room, the made bed, the hollow cradle. Understanding settled over his features like frost. How long? I don't know. Before dawn. She left a note. Silas was already moving, pushing past him, taking the stairs 3 at a time. Saddle my horse, now. House in this weather? Now, Jed? Outside, the world had turned to iron. Freezing rain had fallen in the night, coating every surface with a skin of ice. The fence posts glittered. The barn roof gleamed like polished silver. The road out of the valley, the only road a woman on foot could take, wound between slopes that would be treacherous, even for a horse. Silas pulled on his coat, his gloves, his hat. His fingers fumbled with the buckles. His mind was somewhere else. 7 years ago, the same barn, the same panic. Thomas, saddlebag packed, the star blanket visible through the open flap. Silas, furious, words like stones. You walk out that door, you ain't my blood no more. Thomas's face, hurt flashing to hard, soft as stone in the space of a breath. Fine by me. The sound of hooves on frozen ground. The shape of his son's back, growing smaller, disappearing around the bend in the road. Silas standing in the doorway, waiting for him to turn around. Waiting for the words that would fix it, that would bring him back, that would make everything right again. The words never came. Thomas never turned. And Silas had stood there until the cold drove him inside, telling himself it was the boy's choice, the boy's stubbornness, the boy's fault for not understanding that love didn't always look like softness. 7 years of that lie. 7 years of letters he never sent, prayers he never prayed, grief he never let himself feel because feeling it would mean admitting he'd been wrong. Now another person was riding away, another chance to stand still and let silence win. Jed led the horse out, breath fogging in the gray dawn light. Silas, where would she go? Town. The church. Pastor Whitmore. That's 5 miles in this weather. With a baby. I know what it is, Jed. He swung into the saddle. The leather was stiff with cold, the horse dancing beneath him, eager or anxious or both. Silas. Jed's hand caught the bridle. His face was strange, tight, conflicted. The look of a man wrestling with something he'd held too long. There's something I should have told you, years ago. Not now. Yes, now. The words came out rough. I saw Thomas. 3 years back in Denver. He was thin, coughing, but alive. The world stopped. He begged me not to tell you, said he wasn't ready, said he needed more time. Jed's voice cracked. I honored his wish, and then he died before he was ever ready. Silas stared down at the man who'd worked beside him for 31 years, the man who'd helped him build this ranch, bury his wife, survive the silence after Thomas left, the man he'd trusted more than anyone still breathing. You knew where he was. Yes, you knew, and you let me think. I know what I did. I buried an empty coffin, Jed. I put flowers on dirt that doesn't hold anything. I know. Tears now, cutting through the weathered face like cracks in leather. I'm sorry. God knows I'm sorry. But he was so scared, Silas. So sure you'd turn him away if he came back. I thought if I gave him time. Time. The word tasted like ash. Time killed him. Time and silence and everyone too afraid to say the truth out loud. He kicked the horse forward. Jed's hand fell away. Silas. Find Mrs. Pruitt. Tell her what happened. If I'm not back by noon, send someone after me. He didn't wait for an answer. The horse lunged into the frozen morning, hooves crunching on ice, and Silas Crane rode toward town, with his dead son's words burning in his chest, and a woman's guilt driving him forward. The road was a ribbon of mud and ice, treacherous enough to kill a man who wasn't careful. And Silas wasn't being careful. He pushed the horse harder than he should have, hooves skidding on frozen ruts, breath coming in white bursts that vanished behind him. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down like a hand on his chest. Freezing rain had stopped falling, but the cold remained. The kind of cold that got into bones, into thoughts, into the spaces between heartbeats where a man kept the things he couldn't say out loud. You let everyone go. The thought came unbidden, sharp as a blade. Eleanor to the consumption. Thomas to his pride. Now the boy, your grandson, to a woman who thinks she's not worthy of shelter. He leaned into the wind. The horse stumbled, caught itself, kept running. What kind of man loses everyone and just keeps standing in an empty house? What kind of man builds an empire and lets it rot because he's too proud to bend? A mile from town, he saw her. She wasn't walking. She was kneeling in the mud by the side of the road, the baby clutched to her chest, the star blanket wrapped around them both. Her head was bowed, her shoulders shook. She looked like someone who'd stopped running because there was nowhere left to go. Silas pulled the horse up hard, swung down before the animal fully stopped. What in God's name are you doing? Miriam didn't look up. Leaving. You're dying. You're killing yourself and the boy? I killed Thomas. Her voice was flat, empty. The voice of someone who'd been carrying a weight so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. I might as well finish it. Silas stood over her, ice in his beard, mud on his boots, chest heaving from the ride. The words hit him like stones. You didn't kill Thomas. I told him to stay away from you. Now she looked up. Her face was ravaged, red-eyed, tear-streaked. Every wall she'd built crumbled to rubble. I told him you were the monster he said you were. I told him he didn't need to go home. The fever killed him. The fever took 3 days, her voice cracked. 3 days, Mr. Crane. 3 days when I could have put him on a train, could have brought him back to you. But I believed what he believed, and I let him die in a boarding house in Denver because I was too proud to admit I was wrong. The words hung in the frozen air, rain and tears on her face, indistinguishable. The baby whimpered against her chest. Silas felt something shift inside him, something old and heavy, grinding like millstones. You're not the only one who killed him. Miriam's eyes widened. I drove him away. I wrote letters I never sent. I let 7 years pass without riding to Denver, without swallowing my pride, without... His voice broke. He let it. You didn't send your letters. I didn't send mine. You didn't send my son home, and I didn't go find him. That's not comfort. No. He knelt in the mud beside her, eye to eye, two people gutted by the same ghost. It's truth. Silence. The wind cut across the empty road. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out and received no answer. He forgave you, Miriam whispered. In the last letter, he understood. He forgave you too, said it wasn't your fault. Wasn't anyone's fault. I don't know how to believe that. Neither do I. Silas looked at the baby, at the gray eyes blinking up at him, at the tiny face red with cold, at the star blanket Eleanor had stitched before Thomas was born. But maybe believing isn't the first step. Maybe the first step is just stopping the running, the blaming, the dying alone on the side of the road when there's a warm house and people who... He stopped. His throat closed around the rest. People who need you, people who want you to stay. He reached out, took the baby from her arms. It was the first time he'd held his grandson. The weight was so slight, impossibly slight, like holding a promise wrapped in wool. The boy didn't cry, just looked at him with Thomas's eyes, Eleanor's patience, and something entirely his own. Silas felt the crack in his chest widen, felt something warm pour through it, painful and bright. "Get up," he said. Miriam stared at him. "Why?" "Because this boy needs a mother, and I need you to stop running." He stood, grandson in one arm, and reached down with the other. "We all need to stop running." She looked at his hand, at the baby in his arms, at the star blanket, muddy now, stars still visible beneath the dirt. She took his hand. He pulled her to her feet, steadied her when she swayed, and for the first time in 7 years, Silas Crane held something fragile, without being afraid it would break. The road back to the ranch was long. The cold was bitter, but neither of them was alone, and that he was learning made all the difference. The cemetery was quiet. Snow covered Thomas's grave, hiding the lie carved in stone. 2 days had passed since the road. 2 days of Miriam resting, the baby feeding, Mrs. Pruitt fussing over both of them like a hen with borrowed chicks. 2 days of Silas moving through his house like a ghost in his own halls, unsure where he belonged now that the rooms didn't feel quite so empty. He hadn't spoken to Jed. Couldn't find the words. 31 years of trust didn't disappear overnight, but it didn't heal overnight either. Some wounds needed air before they could close. So he'd come here, to the hill where his family lay buried, to the place he'd avoided for 2 years, because standing over an empty grave felt like admitting defeat. Miller's Hill sat a half-mile from town, fenced in iron that had rusted to the color of old blood. Wind-bent pines stood sentry along the edges, their branches bare now, reaching toward a sky the color of wet slate. The snow from last week's storm was melting, leaving patches of brown earth showing through like bones beneath skin. Eleanor's grave was older, weathered, the letters of her name softened by seasons. Eleanor Marie Crane, 1842-1889. Beloved wife and mother, she walked in light. Thomas's marker stood beside it, newer, sharper, a lion granite. Thomas Samuel Crane, 1869-1897. Beloved son, there was no body beneath that stone. Just an empty coffin Silas had buried, because he couldn't stand the thought of his son rotting in some Denver potter's field with no one to mourn him. He'd ordered the casket, paid the gravediggers, stood alone in the rain while Pastor Whitmore read words that felt hollow because there was nothing real to bury. Now he stood in the same spot, hat in hand, and tried to remember why he'd thought that charade would help. "I don't know how to do this, El." His voice came out rough, scraped raw by silence and cold. He wasn't sure who he was talking to, Eleanor, Thomas, God, or just the wind. Maybe all of them, maybe none. "I never knew how to talk to him. You were the one who understood him. You were the one who could make him laugh, make him listen. When you died, I didn't know..." He stopped, breathed. "I didn't know how to be his father without you showing me the way." The wind answered, "Nothing else. I thought if I was hard enough, he'd be strong. If I pushed him, he'd push back and become something. Someone who could survive this land, this life." And he shook his head. "I didn't understand that being hard just made him run, made him think I didn't want him." A crow landed on Eleanor's headstone, cocked its black eye at him, and flew away. He had a son, El, a boy, Thomas's boy. The words caught in his throat. "He looks just like him, same eyes, same jaw. And there's a woman, she's not what I expected. She's not what Thomas told her I was either." He thought of Miriam's face on the road, the guilt carved into her features, the weight she'd been carrying alone, all those miles, all those months. We've both been blaming ourselves for the same ghost, both carrying letters we never sent, both thinking if we'd just done one thing different, he'd still be alive. The cemetery was silent. Even the wind had died. But he forgave us, El. At the end, he understood. He wrote it down, said he was sorry, said he wanted to come home. Silas's vision blurred. He blinked it clear. "I don't know if I can forgive myself. I don't know if that's something a man earns or something God decides. But I know I can't keep living like I have been, standing in an empty house waiting to die, letting everything we built turn to dust because I'm too proud to bend." He looked down at his left hand. at the gold band that had circled his finger for 38 years. Eleanor had given it to him the day they wed. A narrow thing, simple, nothing fancy. They'd had no money then, just a claim and a dream and the kind of stubborn hope that built empires out of dust. She'd slipped it on his finger and said, "This means you're mine, Silas Crane, in this life and whatever comes after." He'd never taken it off, not when she got sick, not when she died. Not when Thomas left, or when they buried the empty coffin, or when the nights got so long he forgot what morning looked like. The ring had become a shield, a wall, a way of saying I'm still married to her, still faithful, still the man she knew, even when that man had turned to stone. But Eleanor wouldn't want him to be stone. Eleanor would want him to be soft enough to hold a baby, brave enough to claim a grandson, humble enough to stand in front of a whole town and admit he'd been wrong. Slowly, like pulling a knife from a wound, Silas worked the ring off his finger. The skin beneath was pale, indented, marked by decades of gold. He held the ring in his palm and felt the weight of it, such a small thing to carry so much meaning. He knelt, set the ring on Thomas's headstone, gold against gray. "I should have followed you, son. Should have said I was wrong out loud, not just on paper I never sent. I can't give you that now, but I can give your boy something I never gave you." He stood. "I can give him a grandfather who learned how to bend." The church bell began to toll. Not a funeral peal, not this time. Just the evening call, summoning the faithful to vespers. But the sound rolled across the valley like something larger, something that reached back through years and forward through whatever time he had left. Silas listened. For the first time in 7 years, he didn't flinch. He thought of Easter, 2 days away. The vigil service. The whole town gathered in candlelight, waiting for resurrection. He could stand up in that church, could claim his grandson in front of God and everyone, could tell the truth about Thomas, about Miriam, about the letters, and the blanket, and the woman who'd walked 400 miles to die on holy ground. It would cost him. His pride, his privacy, the cold, untouchable image he'd built around himself like armor. But Thomas had already paid a higher price. And the baby, Samuel, if they used the name Thomas wanted, deserved a future that wasn't mortgaged to Silas's fear. He looked at the ring one last time, touched Eleanor's headstone cold beneath his palm. "Wish me luck, El. I'm about to do something I should have done a long time ago." Then he walked down the hill toward the church where Pastor Whitmore was waiting and where the whole town would finally hear the truth. He hadn't spoken in church since Eleanor's funeral. Tonight, he was going to say everything he'd never said. The ranch house was quiet when Silas came downstairs, dressed in clothes he hadn't worn in years, the dark suit, the white shirt, the string tie Eleanor had given him for their 20th anniversary. The fabric smelled of cedar and thyme, but it still fit. Some things, at least, hadn't changed. Miriam was waiting in the parlor. She stood by the window, the baby in her arms, wearing a dress Mrs. Pruitt had altered from one of Eleanor's old things. Deep blue, simple, the kind of garment a woman might wear to church if she wanted to be seen but not stared at. Her hair was pinned back. Her face was pale but steady. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Yes, I do." "Well, people will talk. They'll say, I know what they'll say." Silas crossed to the mirror by the door, adjusted his tie with fingers that didn't quite want to cooperate. "They'll say Thomas had a wife I never met and a son I never knew about. They'll say I drove my boy away and he died alone in Denver. They'll say I'm a proud old fool who let silence kill his family." And he met her eyes in the mirror. "And they'll be right about all of it." Miriam shook her head. "You're not doing this for them. You're doing this for Samuel." Silas turned, looked at the baby, at the gray eyes that watched him with something that might have been curiosity, might have been trust, for Thomas, and for me, because if I don't say it out loud, I'll carry it to my grave. And I've carried enough. Jed was waiting by the wagon. He'd hitched the good team, brushed the horses until their coats gleamed, polished the leather until it shone. He stood with his hat in his hands, face lined with something more than weather, regret maybe, or hope, or both. "Silas." "Jed." Silence. The horses stamped in blue. "I don't know if you can forgive me," Jed said. "I don't know if I deserve it. But I want you to know I thought I was protecting him, protecting both of you. I thought if I gave him time." "I know." Silas's voice was quiet. Not soft exactly. He didn't think he knew how to be soft, but not hard either. Something in between. Something new. "You were wrong, but so was I. So was everyone." Does that mean?" "It means get in the wagon. We're going to church." Jed's face cracked into something that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same country. He climbed up to the driver's seat, took the reins, and waited. Silas helped Miriam into the back, then climbed up beside Jed. The baby made a small sound, not a cry, just a noise, the kind infants make when the world shifts beneath them, and Miriam hushed him with a murmur. The wagon lurched forward. The road to town stretched ahead, still muddy from the thaw, lined with cottonwoods just beginning to bud. In 2 weeks, they'd be green. In a month, the whole valley would be alive again. But tonight was Easter Vigil. Tonight was about waiting in darkness for the light to return. The church was full, every pew packed, every face turned toward the altar where Pastor Whitmore stood in his vestments, candles flickering in the draught from the door. The congregation had been singing when Silas entered, an old hymn, one he half remembered from childhood. But the voices faltered as heads turned, as whispers rippled through the room like wind through wheat. Silas Crane. Is that, who's the woman? Lord have mercy. Is that a baby? Silas walked down the center aisle like a man approaching his own hanging. Miriam followed. Samuel pressed against her chest, the star blanket visible beneath her shawl. Every eye tracked them, every breath held. Oswin Bell sat in the back pew, his city coat immaculate, his face arranged in careful neutrality. But his eyes were calculating, weighing, measuring the distance between Silas Crane and the grave. Pastor Whitmore stopped mid-sentence. His gaze moved from Silas to Miriam to the baby, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, then understanding, then a quiet kind of welcome. Silas, he said, you have something to say? I do. Silas turned to face the congregation. He saw faces he'd known for decades. Ranchers, merchants, widows, children. People who'd bought his cattle, attended his wife's funeral, whispered about his son behind his back. People who'd watched him become stone and said nothing because silence was easier than truth. Most of you know my son Thomas ran off 7 years ago, he said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. Most of you know I let him go. What you don't know is why. The church was silent. Even the candle flames seemed to hold still. I told him he wasn't my blood anymore. Said it because I was angry, because I was scared, because I didn't know how to be a father without my wife showing me the way. He paused. I never took it back, never followed him, never wrote a letter I had the courage to mail. His thumb moved to his ring finger, found bare skin. The absence steadied him somehow. 2 years ago, Thomas died in Denver. I buried an empty coffin on Miller's Hill and told myself it was enough. Told myself I'd done my duty, paid my respects, put it behind me. He shook his head. It wasn't enough. It wasn't anything. Murmurs now, soft as moth wings. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, is that Thomas left something behind. Silas turned toward Miriam, toward the baby in her arms, gray eyes blinking in the candlelight. He left a woman who loved him, and he left a son. The murmurs became gasps. Someone in the back pew dropped a hymnal. This is Miriam Cole. She walked 400 miles to die on those church steps because she had nowhere else to go. She didn't come for my money or my name. She came because she wanted holy ground for her boy. He crossed to Miriam, held out his arms. She hesitated only a moment. Then she placed the baby in his hands, this small warm weight, this living proof that Thomas had existed beyond the grave. Silas lifted the child so the whole congregation could see. His name is Samuel. His voice broke on the word. He let it. Samuel Thomas Crane, my grandson, Thomas's son. Oswin Bell stood. Mr. Crane, his voice cut through the hush like a blade. This is all very moving, but there's no documentation, no marriage certificate, no proof this child is. Sit down, Mr. Bell. Pastor Whitmore's voice carried an authority Silas had never heard in it before. This is a church, not a courtroom. The law doesn't care about churches, Pastor. Without legal proof of paternity, the law. Silas turned to face Bell. The lawyer's polished confidence flickered for just a moment. You've been circling this ranch for years, waiting for me to die, without an heir, waiting for the auction. I've been protecting my interest. Your interests. Silas took a step toward him, just one, but Bell stepped back. My wife is buried on that land. My son's memory lives in every fence post and pasture. And now my grandson will inherit what Thomas walked away from, because I'm claiming him here, tonight, in front of God, in this whole town. He looked around the church. At the faces watching, some shocked, some moved, some uncertain. Anyone who wants to challenge that can take it up with me, but I'd think hard before you do, because I've spent 7 years being silent, and I'm done. Bell's mouth opened, closed. He sat down. Pastor Whitmore's voice rose, gentle but sure. Let us pray for this family. For the child Samuel, who has come to us through grief and grace, for Miriam, who carried him through darkness, and for Silas, who has opened his heart at last. Then the choir began to sing, Abide with me, fast falls the eventide, Eleanor's hymn, Thomas's lullaby. The song Miriam had sung in the dark hallway while Silas stood frozen outside the door. He didn't sing, not really, but his lips moved, shaping words he hadn't spoken in years, and beside him Miriam's voice rose soft and clear, and somewhere in his arms the baby sighed, and settled against his chest like he'd always belonged there. The church bell began to ring, not a funeral toll, not a summons. The Easter peal, deep and bright, rolling across the frozen valley, announcing to anyone who could hear that something dead had come back to life. Silas held his grandson and let the sound wash over him. And for the first time in 7 years, he didn't feel like a man waiting to die. He felt like a man who'd finally learned how to live. Spring came early that year, the first green shoots pushing through snow that hadn't finished falling. Easter morning broke clear and cold, the sky scrubbed clean by the night's last storm. Light poured across the valley in long golden bands, touching the peaks of the Wind River Range, sliding down into the pastures where cattle stood in clusters, breath rising like prayers. Silas watched it from the porch. Behind him, the house was warm, alive in ways it hadn't been for years. Mrs. Pruitt singing off-key in the kitchen, the clatter of pans, the smell of coffee and bacon and something sweet baking in the oven. Sounds and scents he'd forgotten a home could hold. Miriam sat in Eleanor's rocking chair by the window, the baby in her arms. Samuel. The name still felt new on his tongue, but it fit. The way a key fits a lock. The way a hand fits a glove, worn soft by years. The star blanket was wrapped around the boy. Mrs. Pruitt had washed it, mended the torn edges, restitched the stars that had come loose. The wool was softer now. The blue faded to the color of winter twilight. But the stars remained, 47 of them, white thread against blue, a map Eleanor had made before her son was born. She'd stitched them for Thomas. Now they covered Thomas's son. He slept through the night. Silas turned. Miriam was watching him, the ghost of a smile on her lips. "First time?" he asked. "First time." He nodded. Crossed to the cradle. No, not the cradle anymore. They'd moved Samuel to the crib that had been Thomas's, brought down from the attic and polished until the wood gleamed. The baby looked up at him, gray eyes. Thomas's eyes, but the expression was different, curious, trusting, unmarked by the weight of old wounds. "Eleanor used to say Thomas didn't sleep through the night until he was 2, Silas said. "Thought we'd never rest again." "Did you?" "Eventually." He touched the edge of the blanket, felt the soft wool beneath his fingers. Everything comes eventually. Later that afternoon, he walked to Miller's Hill, alone. The snow was nearly gone now, just patches in the shadows where the sun couldn't reach. New grass pushed up through the mud, pale green, fragile. The iron fence around the cemetery had been repainted. Jed's doing, probably, though neither of them had spoken of it. Silas knelt at Thomas's grave. The wedding ring still sat on the headstone where he'd left it, gold dulled by weather, but still visible. He didn't take it back. Instead, he placed something new beside it, a small wooden cross, no bigger than his hand, carved with letters he'd shaped himself. Samuel Thomas Crane, born 1898, not a grave marker, a promise. "Your son's going to know your name," he said quietly. "Going to know you weren't a coward, and I wasn't a monster. Going to know we both tried, just too quiet, too late." He stood, brushed the mud from his knees. But not him, he's going to know the words. The porch again. Sunset now, the sky streaked with colors he had no names for. Miriam beside him, Samuel in her arms. The land stretching out before them, 10,000 acres, but it meant something different now. Not a legacy to protect, a future to build. The church bell tolled in the distance. Evening vespers, Easter night. Silas listened until the last note faded. "What do we do now?" Miriam asked. He looked at her, at the boy, at the star blanket catching the last of the light. "We stay." "Just stay?" "That's the hardest part. Staying, not running, not leaving." He paused. "I learned that too late." "But he won't." He reached out, touched his grandson's cheek. "Samuel." The baby blinked. "Welcome home." The stars on the blanket glowed in the fading light. 47 of them, some mended, some faded, all still there. Eleanor had stitched them for a son who ran away. Now they covered a grandson who would never have to. Silas Crane watched the sun go down over land his family had worked for 3 generations. The woman beside him breathed. The baby slept. The silence between them held no weight. For the first time in 7 years, it was full.